Good afternoon. Last week we covered the worst exotic kinetic slot weapons, and you guys did not skin us alive, so we're back again. And this week we're going to talk about the 10 worst exotic energy slot weapons. Now, as a disclaimer, that happened from last time we were carrying over into this time. Just because it ends up on this list does not mean that we think it is the worst weapons of all time. It's just the top 10 of the worst in this particular slot. And we're going to be taking a rough average between the PvE and the PvP performance of each weapon. So let's get straight into it by talking about Hard Light. The Hard Light exists. It has fantastic stats. It allows you to switch between the different elements, and when you ricochet shots, it deals bonus damage with reduced damage fall off. In PvP, this weapon feels, well, at least it should feel, very competent in almost any situation. An increased range with a little bit of ricochet can be very helpful in PvP. And in PvE, the idea is that this is supposed to be a great tool that allows you to break any shield as need be. Being that it's coming from a primary slot, you can adjust the damage type on the fly without having to go into your inventory, so it doesn't lock you into it, allowing you to pop shields very easily. And you also get a slight bonus to, depending on whatever element you have equipped, a bonus stat. The problem with this is that the Dead Messenger exists. The Dead Messenger is a much easier and much more consistent and higher damage way of acquiring the shield rupturing type effect within PvE, where this would be primarily used, and in PvP as weapons, especially auto rifles, continue to get better and better with realistically just better perks. This weapon at the end of the day does not feel great. So what do we do to fix it? The idea I have for this thing, whatever damage type or element that you're in, kills generate an elemental pickup depending on what element you're in. So for example, if you are in Void, you'll get a kill after maybe X amount of kills, or maybe randomly after a set amount of kills, you'll get a Void Breach. Solar, you'll get a Fire Sprite, and Arc, you'll get an Ionic Trace. This at least keeps some type of usability with the weapon outside of just having it be a well-statted auto rifle. The Symmetry, and thank you to my team at TDT for helping me out with some of the footage here. The Symmetry is a very fun scout rifle, arguably one of my favorites in the game, but it was one of the few that did not get any sort of update with Arc 3.0. The Symmetry still has great usage in PvE and low-level activities, and in PvP it can be very fun to get a bunch of stacks of the Revolutions going into 2-tap Guardians. But again, there's a lot of things that have come out that have just surpassed what the Symmetry can do in both PvP and in PvE. It still has somewhat of a niche just because no other weapon has this primary ammo blaster fire type thing that the Symmetry has, but it still feels like it's lackluster. Overall, I don't want Symmetry to lose its identity. Rather, I would propose that the Symmetry allows you, whenever you get these stacks from headshots and even perhaps bonus stacks from getting kills, instead of it being more damage depending on how many stacks you have, rather it'll determine how much time you have in an amped Revolutions mode. Maybe, for example, after 6 headshots, you get 6 stacks and maybe a couple kills in there. Let's say it gets up to 10 stacks. You will then be able to translate that into 10 seconds of, let's say in PvP, 2 taps, and in PvE, somewhere between 10 and 20 overall stacks. So in other words, the base stack, even if you have just 1 second of the, or 1 stack of the Revolutions perk, it'll be overall higher damage, but spread out for possibly a much larger period of time. By the way, folks, one more thing before we continue on. I made a post a little while ago talking about this would be a really funny shirt, and you all agreed, so I went ahead and, of course, actually made the shirt. The link will be in the description as well as the pinned comment. If you want to pick up the Don't Bunch Up Banana shirt for yourself, go check it out. All right, let's continue on with the video. Next is the Trespasser. The Trespasser in PvP is fine, but it feels old. The Trespasser really feels like it should have stayed as an exotic weapon in D1. Like in D1, this would have really made sense as an exotic weapon, but now coming into D2, it doesn't feel like anything special. Currently, whenever you get a kill, you reload, you'll be able to get a sort of super burst that fires a 5-round burst, which is just shy of getting a kill in PvP if you land all headshots. And in PvE, this is realistically a lot more fun than I think a lot of people give it credit for, but still, why would you use your exotic slot on a sidearm that is just okay at ad clear when there are much better options? Even something like the Risk Runner would be better for arc damage clear. I like the idea of a run and gun sidearm, and it's odd to me that something like Cryosthesia, which has an arguably much stronger secondary fire or much stronger kill clip style effect with it being a freezing shot. So what if the Trespasser either A, did not lose its super burst after a period of time, you just maintained it until you pulled the trigger again, giving a lot more usability, or B, allowed you to reload while sprinting, which plays perfectly into its run and gun sort of personality. Or C, whenever you get a kill and reload, it will give you amplified immediately. Even if you're on a non-arc class, this would help out the Trespasser feel a lot more at home. Next is the Lord of Wolves, a weapon that since the nerfs has always appeared on our list, so let's keep it brief. The Lord of Wolves sucks in all areas of the game, as it is a just okay fusion rifle and a just okay shotgun. It seems to be sort of riding the line between the both of these, and with Solar getting a lot more verbiage and reworks, and especially being that this season is like the season of Solar and you still don't see Lord of Wolves, I think that is very telling. The Lord of Wolves needs some help. The idea that we've proposed in the past is that after you get a kill, the fire rate of all nearby shotguns, sort of similar to the Gallahorn, but in shotgun form, or an effect like it, would suddenly get stronger. So you get a kill with the Lord of Wolves, all of your shotguns suddenly increase their fire rates. Cool, right? It kind of operates as a sort of pack leader sort of thing, which seems to be the Lord of Wolves' general effect. The other idea is that it just causes Scorch on all damage fired, or maybe in its more bigger burst fire mode, being that that's very hard to land in PvP, so it wouldn't cause too much of a problem. Or maybe kills generate a radiant effect to all nearby shotgun users, something that gives the Lord of Wolves some type of place in the game, outside of it being a funny, weird identity crisis between a fusion rifle and a shotgun. Moving on, the Manticore. In PvP, the Manticore is, again, one of the exotics that just has a lot of stats, which is not an exotic perk anymore, Bungie, but it does have that ability to float in the air. Unfortunately, this came out just about the time that the airborne effectiveness stat came out. It still does not feel good to put yourself into the air, because you eventually just start cosplaying as the ducks from Duck Hunt, and it feels terrible. And in PvE, why in the world would you ever use the Manticore? Even if you are getting a slight bump in damage, there is literally no reason to use the Manticore over just having a different PvE orientated perks in the Void SMG slot. There are so many better options for the Manticore. It's hard to say what the Manticore should get to fix its problems. There's so little that doesn't seem to fit for the thing. Even the Void flavoring feels off, as Void isn't really trying to be in the air. That's arguably more of a Solar thing, or even arguably an Arc weapon thing, because Arc at least is giving you the amplified. So what do we do? Well, I would personally like to move it to the Strand slot, and then when you get a kill, or when perhaps for its catalyst, when you are in the air, you actually get Woven Mail while in the air. That suddenly has a lot more usability for the overall kit and subclass verbiage, which the overall sandbox team is much more building towards. But I don't know. What do you guys think in the comments below? Next is the Edge of Intent, and the only exotic glaive that is going to appear on this list. I'm not just saying that just to nullify and say, oh yes, all exotic glaives suck. I think that the Hunter's exotic glaive in PvP is absolutely fantastic, arguably the best in the game, and the Titan's exotic glaive, it still feels like we need to figure it out, and I think some people are starting to figure it out. It at least holds its own, even if it's not necessarily the best in PvE. It still has definitely an exotic flavor. That cannot be said of the Edge of Intent. Why run this over literally any other exotic? This is just a weaker version of a Rift or a Healing Grenade. There are so many ways to get this effect. I've seen some suggestions stating that maybe when you block, it heals nearby allies, similar to like a Excalibur thing. But that feels like that breaks the parity of how the other exotic glaives work, being that the other exotic glaives only get their exotic effect when you actually have that super shot ready to go. So the idea I think would be much better is that this turret would actually hang around your shoulder, similar to an Arc Soul, allowing it to be a lot more mobile and a lot more adaptable, or maybe allow that healing turret to also grant radiant, so it's at least some bump in damage. Frankly, I feel like from the bottom up, this entire exotic glaives needs to be reworked. Just start fresh. Diris is realistically not too terrible for PvE. It definitely has some use cases in PvE, and it's also, with its catalyst, the only way to get amplified on any subclass in the game, which is pretty cool. In PvP, this thing is god-awful, and being that it's not really carrying its weight super duper hard in PvE, we've decided to throw it on this list. In PvP, the Diris just flat out needs to hold twice the amount of ammo that it currently has. 2 shots for 1 kill is horrible for the ammo economy, and I am positive somebody has overlooked this. That realistically would at least bring it in line with everything else, and then maybe we can check it from there, because it's probably okay after that. Getting kills with this thing, getting footage with this thing was rough. And PvE, there's just better options for this. It works fine enough. Maybe some way of generating ammo after kills, maybe some way of getting a little bit of kickback for the investment that you're having to put into this thing. It feels just kind of gimmicky. And it feels like if the damage were better overall, this would be just more usable and more user-friendly. But that's a very boring way to buff stuff, as often that doesn't often solve the problems, the base problems of the thing. It just makes it into a problem that the sandbox team later kicks down the road. Speaking of kicking the can down the road, Prometheus Lens. Prometheus Lens is the Tommy's matchbook with a special ammo requirement. The Prometheus Lens, again, talking previously about the Lord of Wolves, being that we are in the season of the Solar and it is still not getting any use, I believe is very telling. The Prometheus Lens exotic perk gives it a Scorch AoE type effect after you hold down the trigger for an extended period of time, similar to the Tommy's matchbook, and it will also reload itself from reserves every time you get a kill. So the idea is that you can continue to generate a large AoE burst of Solar and Scorching. My suggestion to get this thing better is either to A, just right out the gate, allow the weapon to scorch targets on hits. It's already a special weapon in PvP, so that realistically isn't going to change much. It opens up a lot of builds to being able to actually use this thing within their subclasses, not just PvP, but also PvE as well. Or B, if that's a little too scary, make it so that it gets this Scorch immediately right as soon as you fire out the gate from either picking up an orb of light or picking up a fire sprite, or maybe allow it to generate a fire sprite, bonus damage and Scorch up from that. Just a thought. Borealis' exotic perk is that it is a extremely well statted sniper rifle. That's about it. In PvE, it's a little bit better in that you can actually realistically get its Ionic Return perk to trigger. In PvP, just as a fun fact, if you actually want the Ionic Return perk to proc, you have to break the shield of a super matching the subclass element of the weapon you have equipped. So there's so many stars that have to align, but even if you can get that to happen, guess what? It still will not kill on the body shot. I feel like if there was ever a time to allow somebody to body shot kill, that is the time. The dude earned it. Whoever got that Ionic Return perk in PvP, they freaking earned it. Anyway, in PvE, it's a shield breaker. But again, Dead Messenger exists. The only difference here is that at least the bonus damage feels a little bit better, but it still overall feels very lackluster. I feel like that if whenever you broke the shield PvP or PvE, it would generate some type of AoE burst matching the element of the weapon. Maybe, for example, breaking the shield while it's void will cause a sort of volatile effect to all nearby enemies. Arc will cause a jolting effect, and Solar will cause a scorching effect. Maybe even after kills, something along those lines would help it out tremendously. Most Guardians are speccing for exactly whatever the shields are that they are going to get going into it, or whatever surges they're going to have going into that activity. So there's no reason to take a Borealis which can carry all of them, being that it's only ever going to really realistically use one, at most two of them. So giving it some usability and a little bit more crowd control and utility would help out tremendously. And lastly, the one that barely made it onto this list and arguably should not be on this list is Telesto. There's not a lot of reason to use Telesto in PvE outside of you just loving the thing and just being a cult member of Telesto. In PvP, it is an infinitely ranged fusion rifle, which will always have a place in the game, and it's kind of funny. Telesto is a bit of a shell of its former self in that it is no longer breaking the game every weekend, and its purple goop doesn't last nearly as long. I feel like if they were to make the purple goop last significantly longer, the weapon would feel a lot better as a lockdown lane sort of tool, because right now it's just used for its extremely long range. Maybe outside of that, multi-kills generate a volatile round within the weapon, but again, that feels like a bit of a cop-out. So let me know in the comments below which weapons you think in the heavy slot should be on this list, and if maybe you think maybe something did not end up on this list that should, drop that in the comments as well. If you enjoyed this idea, like, subscribe, we really can use it right now. Bless your faces, and deuces.